final round of the London Chess Classic has a huge impact on who is going to qualify for the candidates tournament next year. What's happening? Gukesh is in a must-win situation. He needs to win with the black pieces against Hans Niemann. If that happens and tournament leader Mickey Adams loses his game, Gukesh wins the tournament outright, and that means that he overtakes ANISH GIRI in the standings of the FIDE circuit. I hope you can still follow it, it's still very complicated, but anyway, we are going to have a look at the game of Hans Niemann with the white pieces against Gukesh. So it's going to be very interesting, and Hans has a big impact on who is going to qualify and who not. Let's see. Hans starts here with a move 1e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, the Italian opening again. And remember that incredibly exciting game Hans had a few days ago against Bartel, that crazy game. Oof, if you haven't seen it yet, make sure to look up it in my channel, and then also subscribe in the meantime if you are kind enough. I will really appreciate it. New game, new chances, and a lot of action on the board. Let's see. It's a quiet game at the start, but you know, with these Italian games it can explode any time soon. I think the first interesting moment of the game is here at move 8. White has just played the move rook e1, and you would expect black just to castle here. That's a very normal developing move, but Gukesh, as I said, is in a must-win situation. He goes for the move h6, and now after the move a5 by white, he can still castle, but he has a different plan. He launches its g-pawn, very aggressive play, and the pawn is about to kick the knight very soon. Let's see. Bishop e3. White is offering the exchange of bishops, and black goes for the move g4. This is according to plan. Where is the knight going? Only 2 squares available. If you go to h4 or to d2, that makes a big difference. Well, if you go to h4, which was not played in the game, then remember there are always tactical issues with that unprotected knight on h4. We discussed it even yesterday in this game of Fabi Caruana with the white pieces against Alireza Firouzja. Another very exciting Italian game. The problem here is that black is going to take, and then it's knight takes e4. The knight can be taken next, which means that black is just winning a pawn. Anyway, the knight didn't go there. It goes to d2. But now it will be harder for Hans to complete its queenside development, because the other knight cannot be developed to d2. Bishop takes e3. Black takes the bishop. How is white going to take back? Maybe rook takes is a move you would expect here. But Hans played a move f takes e3, which is also very interesting. And he has definitely some ideas, because if you do give white some time, then at some point the rook will come back to the f-file to indirectly put pressure against that pawn on f7. And I think black is going to regret having played so aggressively in the opening. But Gukesh had a very interesting plan here. Play this move, knight from f6 to h7, with the idea that if white goes rook f1, the knight can come to g5. That's a very nice original plan, as the knight protects that pawn on f7, and black is doing absolutely fine. Can even consider further expanding on the king side, looking for ways to create imbalances, to look for ways to put pressure against the white king at some point. But this all didn't happen, because instead of putting the rook on f1, Hans brought its knight to that square. Black goes h5, and now the knight comes to g3, and the knight looks nicely placed in time to come to f5. What is black going to play here? Well, Gukesh said, I'm going to protect the pawn on h5 with the move queen g5. Bringing the queen into play, it's a good move. You cannot put a rook on f1 because the pawn on e3 can be taken later. But it should be pointed out that maybe h4 was actually a more direct, a more straightforward way to put white under pressure. Because if the knight goes to f5, you take the knight. Now the f-file is closed again. It's a symmetrical pawn structure. All the 16 pawns are on the board, no open files. And black can even play the move d5, so that the pressure against that pawn on f7 has been taken away. The bishop is under attack, has to move. And I think white is maybe a bit worse here, because these pawns on d5 and e5, they look quite nice. Black can just easily move its pieces, bring its king into safety. I think a very nice position to try to play for a win. but not easy, of course. Let's see what happened. Queen g5 played, and now the knight goes to d2. And here, still many decisions to be made here by black. And the main question is, where is the king going? Castling kingside may not look that attractive any longer because you have advanced your pawns on the king side. You may castle in the other direction, but then you would have to develop your bishop first. Interesting idea. But Gukesh played the move knight e7. Typical plan in a lot of Italian positions, as the knight comes over to g6 very often. We also saw that Firouzja playing yesterday against Fabiano Caruana, and I think that's a nice plan, but here follows the move queen a4 check. What is the king going to do? Well, definitely you cannot play the move bishop d7, blocking the check with your bishop, attacking the queen as it runs into bishop takes f7, deflecting the king. As if you do take the bishop, it's queen takes d7. White wins the pawn, the rook will come to the f-file. White has a powerful attack. So instead, black played here this move c6, blocking the check with a pawn. Now the queen comes to b4, attacking the newly created weakness on d6. Black ignores it by playing the move h4, attacking the knight. The knight goes to f5, and now bishop takes f5. Interesting move. And also here you have to think about what is gonna happen if white ever takes the pawn on b7. Note that black just captured the piece, but with the move queen takes b7, you create a new attack against the rook. Now the king can be brought into safety and you take on f5. Material is even, well, black is actually a pawn down, but after the move d5, the bishop is under threat. Bishop may go somewhere. At some point the pawn on f5 can be regained. You can put a rook on b8. It's a very complicated position, but I'm not sure what's happening. I think black has also chances here to play for something. Anyway, queen takes b7 was not played. White just recaptured with a pawn on f5. So the pawn on d6 is still under threat. Therefore, black played the move d5. Here again, attacking the bishop. Still queen takes b7 is a possibility with a possible transposition to the line we just looked at. Anyway, white is not interested in that pawn on b7 with a good reason. Because the bishop went back to b3. And here still, it's move 20 and black has developed all its pieces. But the king is still in the middle. And where are you going with the king? That's the huge question. Castling kingside was played. But here, Gukesh definitely overlooked something. He may have considered castling in the other direction. I think the king is safe there. Nice center. Rook can help in defense. The knight can come back to f6. The pawn on f5 can be taken at some point. It's a sharp game, but I don't think black has any reasons to complain here. But what is wrong with the move castling kingside? That's maybe a huge surprise. Also to Gukesh, we may assume that he just overlooked the next move by white as rook a4 was played. This is a very original way of ganging up on that pawn on g4. The pawns on the 4th rank, they are so vulnerable, and white attacks it with the queen and the rook. Maybe a simple idea which Gukesh forgot about is that the move knight f6, which is the only way to protect the pawn, is not possible as it hangs the knight on e7. So black is having a huge problem. The pawn on g4 is about to be taken. And once you take that pawn, the entire king side is about to collapse. Black played here the move g3, looking for counterplay against the white king. But queen takes h4. White captures a very juicy pawn. And also intends to go for the exchange of queens. Black just takes on h4. Rook takes. And the problem is that black doesn't have the real possibility of taking back the pawn on f5 because it runs into a check. King has to go to h8. And then you take the pawn on g3 and, well, that's just an extra pawn for white. Things are looking very nice in that case. Therefore, instead of taking the pawn on f5, black first took the pawn on h2 with check. Then rook takes h2 was played. Here, black decided to play the move f6, but we have to understand why he played that move. Why not just taking that pawn on f5? That's another possibility to take the pawn Slightly different situation, materials even, but here white, if this would have played in the game, Hans would definitely have gone for this move e4. Attacking the knight, attacking the pawn on d5. If you do move the knight, then white takes the pawn, followed by rook takes e5, and the center is just falling apart. D takes e4 is one possibility, but now the rook comes into the attack, hitting the pawn. If you protect the pawn, the rook comes with check to g4. King h8, now the knight comes into e4. Look at white's pieces. It's a crushing mating attack. Knight f6, putting pressure against that knight on h7, attacking the rook on e8 as well. It's just completely winning for white. For instance, if you do play f6 to prevent the knight coming there, then it's rook g6, renewing the threat of taking with a knight on f6, as the knight is then protected by the rook. The bishop even covers the a8, a2, g8 diagonal. Things are looking really bad for black here. So therefore, Gukesh didn't take the pawn on f5, but here he must have realized that he is in big trouble. He played the move f6. Hans played the move e4 anyway, putting pressure against that pawn on d5, which is pinned. And there are also additional ideas of getting the rook over via e3 to g3 or h3 with nice attacking ideas against the black king. And don't forget, white is also still having a nice extra pawn. So it's a pawn plus an overwhelming positional advantage. Rook f7. And look what Hans is playing now. Very enterprising play here. Knight f3, that's a good move. After the rook goes to g7, the rook is covering the 7th rank. White strikes in the center with the move d4. Note that the pawn on d5 still cannot move because of the pin. Now white is about to take that pawn on e5. After taking on d4, his knight takes d4, and white has managed to activate the knight, and the knight is coming very soon to e6. Knight to g5. Now pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, and white is going after the next weakness with the move rook h6. The pawn on f6 is threatened to be taken as the knight on d5 is hanging. So if you do play king f7, which was actually Gukesh his move in the game, now very interesting idea. You have to think about what black is planning to do. The rook wants to come to g8, and then the rooks are indirectly attacking the pawn on g2. Therefore, you better don't put the king on f2, rook a g8, and if the knight ever moves, there are these possibilities for black to take on g2 with check. Therefore, Hans made a small different move here. He just played the move king f1, very subtle, just getting out of that g file, avoiding any potential problems against the pawn on g2. Rook a g8 played, and now white seizes the initiative with the move c4, attacking the knight. The knight goes away, and now the pawn moves one square further. Discover check, hitting the king, hitting the rook on g8 if the king moves. If you do play king f8, you can take the rook. You can also take on f6. The position is just falling apart. So the main idea here for black is to come back with the knight to d5, which looks like a stable square, but Hans just takes on d5, c takes d5, and here the move knight e6 was played. White is just aiming for further exchanges, and that's very, very good technique. So good that here Gukesh even resigned. This may seem premature to you at first sight, but the rook cannot go anywhere. If you do play rook to h7, then it's knight takes g5 with check, and next move you take with the rook on h7. That's not possible. If you do take on e6, now we get to see white's idea. Hans would have taken back with the rook, attacking the pawn on f6 one more time, and that pawn cannot be defended. And another point of white's play with the king on f1 is that black is not in time to generate counterplay by taking that pawn on g2. It runs into rook h6, captures the pawn on f6 with check. So there's no time for counterplay with rook check for black. The king has to go to g7, but now the king interferes along the g file, and the rook on g2 can just be taken. That means that the pawn on g2 cannot be taken, but if white can just take the pawn on f6 for free, he will be 2 pawns up. Probably even it will be even worse. More exchanges will follow. In fact, rook takes f6 is just going to be mate, right? If you take with the rook from h6 on f6, both the rook on e6 and f6, they're taking away all the squares. So Gukesh resigned, and that's the end of the dream. He will not win the tournament. He hasn't won the tournament. Mickey Adams is the tournament winner, and Gukesh should probably hope for another time. He's still very young. He has all the possibilities to fight for a spot in the candidates tournament, but not this time. Who it's going to be? Well, maybe there are still some chances until the very end of the year. There are still some tournaments. ANISH GIRI is still having a very good position in the tournament standings of the FIDE circuit. But what's going to happen? I'm not a mathematician. I haven't calculated it all. I'm just waiting for 1st of January to see who it's going to be in the candidates tournament. Stay tuned for more updates. Subscribe to the channel, and of course much more coverage of exciting chess. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.